U.S. newspaper, Mr. Trump can force Ukraine to make peace with Russia if elected. Bloomberg, citing knowledgeable sources, said that former President Donald Trump plans to pressure Ukraine to make peace with Russia if he wins the rematch with President Joe Biden. According to Bloomberg's knowledgeable sources, Mr. Trump's advisors are discussing ways to bring Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin to resume negotiations immediately after the inauguration in case he is elected. One advisor said Washington could help push Kiev to cooperate with Moscow by threatening to cut military aid. On the contrary, the U.S. also threatened to increase aid to Ukraine to pull Russia to the negotiating table. Mr. Trump's advisors such as Larry Kudlow and Robert O'Brien have also publicly called for stronger sanctions against Russia's central bank to convince the Kremlin. Bloomberg's source emphasized that Mr. Trump's aides have not discussed this issue with representatives of Russia or Ukraine, because such behavior is illegal. Moscow has repeatedly said it is ready to negotiate with Ukraine, but only after Mr. Zelensky cancelled the decree banning negotiations with Russia's current leadership. Ukraine's president ordered the ban last fall after Russia announced the annexation of 4 Ukrainian provinces, a move condemned by Kiev and Western countries. Two-level NATO alliance? Also according to Bloomberg sources, another content in Mr. Trump's potential foreign policy is the concept of a two-level NATO alliance. Under this idea, NATO's Common Defense Clause would only apply to countries that have reached a certain level of defense spending. Meanwhile, some other advisors proposed applying new taxes to member countries that delay in completing their financial obligations to NATO. Sources emphasized that there has been no final decision on the above issues. According to Bloomberg, Mr. Trump's potential foreign policy could reverse decades of U.S. policy and at the same time risk fracturing NATO. In response to Bloomberg's information, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said on February 15, Article 5, which commits that an attack on one ally will be considered an attack on all, is the core of NATO. We should not pursue any path that suggests we are trying to separate Europe from North America. The strength lies in having Europe and North America together in NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg said. During his presidency, Mr. Trump has repeatedly called on NATO countries to increase military spending to 2% of GDP, a difficult threshold to achieve for many countries. As of July 2023, only 11 NATO members have reached or exceeded this level. But according to the latest estimates, this number is expected to increase to 18 countries this year. The tense relationship between NATO and Mr. Trump became the focus again this week, after the former president said he threatened the leader of a European country that the U.S. would let Russia do whatever they want if this does not meet the bloc's defense spending target. Bloomberg quoted knowledgeable sources as saying that the leader that Mr. Trump threatened was former German Chancellor Angela Merkel. President Joe Biden and allies in Europe condemned Mr. Trump's warning. President Putin stated the reason he wanted Mr. Biden to win the election. Mr. Putin expressed that he wanted his U.S. counterpart Biden to win the November presidential election, because this candidate is more experienced and predictable than Trump. In an interview on February 14, a Russian journalist asked President Vladimir Putin who he wanted to see win in the possible fight between U.S. President Joe Biden and leading Republican candidate Donald Trump in the race for the House of Representatives. White this year. Biden, he is more experienced, predictable, and a traditional politician, President Putin replied. But we will work with any president in whom the American people have confidence. This is the first time Mr. Putin has publicly commented on this year's U.S. presidential election. The head of the Kremlin also dismissed doubts about the age and health of Mr. Biden, who will turn 82 just a few weeks after the November election. It's true that people said he was incompetent, but when I met Biden 3 years ago, I didn't see the things they said, Mr. Putin said, referring to the meeting in Geneva, Switzerland. According to Bloomberg, RT.